Welcome back to Trail and Ultra Running Training. My name is Will Frantz. I'm a running coach and a strength coach, and the purpose of this podcast is to help you train a little better so you can improve your performance and have some more fun, whatever that may mean for you. Whether your goal is to get a little faster, run a little longer, get through an injury, I want to help just like I help the people I coach, and that is why I put out this free information on a mostly weekly basis. If you enjoy this podcast, I'd appreciate you hitting subscribe and telling the algorithm that runs our lives that you find this podcast worth listening to and worth showing to other people. So today, I want to dive deeper into an email I put out recently. The idea that more mileage might be making you slower. And when you look up on the internet, how do I get better at running? There are an endless number of people. I honestly don't even know. There's a few off the top of my head that I can definitely think of where their answer to how do I get better at running is always going to be some variety of run more miles. And while that's not completely false, it's just not fully true either, right? Like, depending on what you mean by better, it may very well be great advice. I think a lot of the time for training for something like a 200 miler, then running more miles is probably pretty key, right? Like, we probably need to run a lot of miles. We probably need to make sure that your feet can hold up for that long. So depending what we may mean by better, then yeah, more miles might be the answer. But for a lot of people, better actually means faster, and in that case, run more miles may not be your answer, depending on you, what you're doing right now, and your background. In fact, it might actually make you slower. Now, I understand that everything on the internet tells you that more miles will solve your problem, and this is true even from people I really respect. But where we're lacking is context, and this is probably a grander conversation that I might dive into deeper, but words have meaning, and context provides added meaning, right? Like, for example, if you follow the strength training space, like there was, still kind of is, this whole rage about like functional training. Functional is a useless term, right? Like, for the person who's just weaker than the forces of gravity, all training is functional as long as it helps them to get stronger so they can start beating gravity. In fact, for a lot of people, putting them on a leg press and telling them to press their heart out is arguably the most functional thing they can do, because if we put them into something like a squat, then they're just too weak to create any reasonable muscle from that, right? And as a result, they're just going to be building a skill, which I find very valuable if you've heard me talk elsewhere. But point is, right now, they're in a bunch of pain because they're just getting murdered by gravity. And if we make them strong enough so that gravity doesn't win in like the battle of every step, then that is a functional thing for them. And then maybe we can teach them to squat. And say the same thing with the current trend of optimal. All the training bros are on an optimal kick, as if there's like a generalized definition of what that means. And there's not. Like, what's optimal for the person who's just getting murdered by gravity every day is probably going to be different than what's optimal for an Olympia level bodybuilder, as it's going to be different for someone who might care about sports performance, right? A lot of the time when we see optimal, we just mean that it puts a shitload of stress on the muscle in the lengthened position so they can get bigger. If you don't want to get bigger and you care about other stuff, then probably not optimal, right? Anyway, context matters. And what we're lacking in context in the run more miles conversation is, one, the people who are best at long endurance sports tend to have some pretty specific genetic characteristics. One, high cardiovascular abilities. This can mean a wide range of things. It can mean that their aerobic threshold is a little higher, they're able to produce, oxidize fat better, and it can mean that they have a really high VO2 max so that their ceiling is way higher. It also mean they have some stiff tendons so they function more like a spring. And typically, it means that they probably have more slow twitch muscle fibers. We don't need to get super into anatomy here. Just understand that slow twitch is the stuff that gets fatigued less quickly and helps you run longer, not necessarily sprintier, right? And this is not to say that distance runners aren't fast. Of course they are. People who win win the big 6 marathons, like the marathon majors, they run every one of those miles faster than I can run a mile. So they're incredibly fast. But the point is, we're looking at end tails, right? Like they're not running as fast as like Usain Bolt going around the curve, right? So more slow twitch muscle fibers. Now, as a result, they might naturally respond a little better to higher mileage, because that's the type of work that their body inherently wants to do. And this is one of the reasons that looking at high-level professionals may not be a perfect indicator when taken towards people who are just trying to either get into the sport or hit some substantial goals maybe for themselves, but not maybe impressive in the grand scheme of things, right? And I say that as a person who is exactly in that pocket. I am never going to set up impressive numbers. It doesn't mean I can't work hard to hit some big targets for me, right? And that's what most people are doing in this sport. Now, so if we're looking at people who have a lot of these genetic advantages, it's pretty likely that they might be, let's say, built to run 100+ mile weeks. That might just be who they are, and they might respond better to that kind of training. So maybe it doesn't scale down. It might, but maybe not quite as much as we might think it does. Whereas if you're a little bigger, and I don't mean fat, I just mean bigger, right? Like if you are a more muscular human, if you're maybe a fatter human, but if we have a lot more fast twitch muscle fiber or something like that, then maybe that doesn't apply, right? Now, I don't want to go off on a like X people need to train X way and Y people need to train Y way kind of tirade, because that's just also false. But we should admit that genetic build does change the response to training a little bit, right? Like fairly famous example, Jeff Galloway, like the run, walk, run method. He is a faster twitch, heavier athlete for the sport of marathons. And by doing the run, walk, run method, he gives his body just a touch of recovery so that his fast twitch muscles don't get taxed as easily, right? And he can use them more and work to his advantage. Sally McRae is another good example of this. She is muscular especially for the distances she does. And as a result, doing a little more of an interval method would be helpful because it allows you to use your muscles more effectively for what they are, right? We just know that genetic build changes training, so we should probably understand that. I probably shouldn't train like Eliud Kipchoge because we really couldn't be more on the opposite ends of the fast twitch, slow twitch system. Look at a picture of me, 5'7", thick, and him, not that, right? Now, we should also understand that faster running takes a bigger toll on the body. 10 easy miles is less stress on the body than like 7 easy miles plus a 3-mile progression. We can overlook a little bit of nuance here because depending on who you are, there's a line where this happens, right? Like I kept the numbers the same. Now, for some people, like 4-mile easy plus a 3-mile progression would not make that split, but just bear with me, please. Would be harder than 10 miles easy. For others, that might be easier, right? Like there's not a perfect system here, but when we push harder, it tends to be harder. And like we should understand that. So if we're going to run a ton of miles every week, which if we are going to run far, we do actually have to build up a substantial mileage. I'm not against mileage. I just don't think more miles is always the solution to everything. So if we're going to run a bunch of miles every week, then most of those miles are going to need to be easy. Now, a problem that has come over the years, since the 60s mostly, when we look at training plans for high-level athletes, a lot of their easy miles are still at a pretty decent pace. They're easy for them. They could hold a conversation. They might be able to breathe through their nose, probably can, because, again, most of these people don't have structural breathing issues that would inhibit that. That's how they got to their level. Probably can't sing a song, though. Probably don't want to be having that conversation with you, and they likely wouldn't take, like, an important business call during those easy miles, right? Like for years, recovery mileage wasn't even counted in the training program. And a lot of us forget that. There was a kind of both back in the 60s, Arthur Lydiard was really high mileage, like it was a high 100 plus mileage push. And then at the same time, someone came out, and I can't remember his name, it's Joe something, came out with the long, slow distance craze that like kicked off the jogging phenomena. Think Anchorman. Jogging? I hear you just run, right? So it kicked off that phenomenon. And partially because they came out together, and partially because for most people, it doesn't matter, these two things became conflated. So for newer runners, they're the same. As you get better, and especially as we start to crank up more mileage, and we want to get faster, they start to deviate a little more. A recovery pace becomes a real thing, and an easy run becomes different than your recovery run. And maybe you don't really ever get a recovery run because of the impact, but at least like heart rate and effort start to matter, right? Like these things are all important, and they all, again, require context. So if you are running a bunch of miles and you are trying to push big goals, and you've been doing this a while, and all you're doing is running these like slow zone 1 miles, largely because you just want to stay healthy to keep cranking your total numbers, then all we're really doing is training ourselves to be slow. The body learns to do what you teach it to do. The body's also pretty lazy, so if you're capable of more and you teach it to do less, it will happily do less, right? And as a result, you'll get slower. Now, this is not against the shuffle. This is not against slow runs. I think it's an important skill to be able to run at everything from like however fast you can run to a 12-minute mile. That is an important thing to be able to do, especially if we're going to run incredibly long races, especially if we're going to be on trails, especially if we're going to try to run some intervals. It is a valuable skill to be able to cover, like run the gamut, basically, of running paces before we have to walk around that 13 to 14-minute mile range for it to be an efficiency thing. But if you want to be fast, then the shuffle is not all we should do. I've had so many people DM me, and we've had conversations, and they just ask like, hey, I feel like all this slow training is making me slower. When we sit down to look at their training, they do almost zero speed, and they're racking up a shitload of miles at like an 11 to 12-minute mile pace. And further, and this is, I mean, one, fine, that's what you want to do. We'll get to that in a second. Two, if you're a newer runner, that might be really reasonable. But if you have been running for a couple decades and you used to run a like 6-minute mile, and you've run a marathon in sub 3, and then we start to look at an ultra and we just get stuck in the ultra shuffle, then yeah, you're getting slower because your body has no need to be faster. You haven't given it a stimulus, any sort of stimulus, that tells it, hey man, we need to keep this speed, so just get slower. And I don't want this to come across as like judgy or problematic or whatever. Run how you want to run. For example, I'm actually really openly a fan of Andy Glaze. He vocally does not do speed work. He runs an amount of miles that would murder me, and he loves it. He's super happy. He loves doing the sport, and it's just what he wants to do. He runs a shitload of races, a ton of miles, and does zero speed work, and he's stoked on it. And that's fantastic. If that's what you want to do, and that's how you want to run, and that's how you want to participate in fitness, great. But When I get annoyed is when other people take that type of running and sell it to people as the best or the way to train and do a training method, right? It means we're stuck in the 60s. It also means that we're not just stuck in the 60s. We're trying to combine two ideas from the 60s that weren't actually for the same clientele, right? One of them was trying to get people to do something. The other one, that was the long, slow distance stuff. And if you're new to running, and that's where we are, great. You should probably do that. And then if we are a higher caliber athlete, whatever the hell that may mean for you, and you've been doing this for a while and you want to get faster and we can run some faster speeds, then we probably need to differentiate between recovery stuff and easy stuff, because a rising tide raises all ships, and if we have a bigger aerobic base, then it will help. But it is not the only piece to our fitness and training puzzle. And if you're new, again, if your only training strategy, great. But we need to do the fast stuff if you're going to get faster. If you want to get fast, you have to run fast. So I hope this was helpful. This is why context matters and why more mileage might actually be making you slower, in spite of what the internet may have to say about it. If you got something out of this, I would appreciate you sharing it. And if you'd like to chat about your training and see if I can help, please let me know. Like, shoot me a DM on Instagram or respond to one of my emails. If you have my phone number, even better. I don't charge for initial consultations, and even if you do decide to work with me, I have a no questions asked 30-day guarantee, because people on the internet lie to you, and I could be. And I would like to prove that I'm not, and give you the option to bail if you hate it. So I hope you have a great day. I hope you enjoy your next run. Go do some speed work. Have a great one.